The River North Esk in Midlothian follows a course that fires the imagination. This is a river of contrasts and surprises, where ideas of a lost romantic world were in conflict with the age of industry. Scotland's rivers are among the country's greatest treasures. The enduring force of their seaward flow has shaped the landscape. Their steep gorges and majestic floodplains have formed borders and inspired poetic verse. In this series, I'm celebrating the rich and fruitful relationship between rivers and people, and meeting a cast of characters who live along the banks of our great waterways. In this programme, I'm exploring the River North Esk and decoding its past. My grand tour begins high in the Pentland Hills and heads roughly northeast, past where witches are said to have leapt, and then on through a once thriving industrial landscape, and visits a chapel steeped in myth and legend. Journey's end is the shell-covered expanse of Musselburgh Beach. I'm setting out on a remote track that follows an ancient route through the Pentland Hills, southwest of Edinburgh. This rather wild and lonely landscape is one which I guess is seldom visited, unless of course you're walking across the Pentlands or, like me, are in search of the source of a river. The path takes me up to the highest point of the pass, where I come to an intriguingly named rock called the Borestane. It must have been a significant landmark for generations of travellers across the Pentlands. And I think it's called the Borestone because on the top here you can clearly see 3 bore marks. The reason for these holes has been lost in the mists of time, but one story suggests that they might have been here since the 13th century. Now, according to local legend, this is where the hero of Scottish independence, William Wallace, raised his standard 700 years ago. An amazing place to rally the troops. Just below the Borestane, I come to a boggy patch of ground where rainwater slowly seeps down the hillside to form an almost hidden pool. So this has to be the source of the River North Esk, and it's a very exciting place to be because I just love being at the source of things. This is the start of a story, the start of a journey, the start of my grand tour down the River North Esk. The infant river flows between rounded, featureless summits before reaching the village of Carlops, 4 kilometres below. Built on the weaving industry, the mills here took advantage of power provided by water from the Esk. Today, the village clusters around the main road and ends at a rather unprepossessing car park. Towering over it is a 15-metre-high pillar of rock, which gives a clue to the meaning behind the village name of Carlops. Some say that Carlops derives from the Scots Carlin's Loup, or in modern English, Witch's Leap. Local legend claims that this was where witches would sport and play, leaping onto their broomsticks and flying over the Pentlands. An amazing sight. From the dark magic of flying witches, I enter an enchanted world where the River North Esk flows through a secluded glade called Habbie's Howe. It was made famous by the 18th century poet and playwright Alan Ramsay, who knew the area around Carlops well and based his smash hit The Gentle Shepherd here. It's a romantic pastoral comedy about love, famous for its pioneering use of the Scots language. Gerda Stevenson lives in the village and tells me about the local connection. Ramsay was inspired by this landscape, was he not?
Oh yes, and who wouldn't be? It's so beautiful. It's interesting that because the play was such a hit, the landscape has taken on the names, the place names, in The Gentle Shepherd.
And replace the old names
Yeah.
with names, well, fictional
Yes.
names, really.
So you have got Patey's Hill and Patey's Mill and Peggy's Pool and Sandy's Cave.
Detailed illustrations of many of these locations were included in later editions of The Gentle Shepherd, including a rock called Habbie Craig, where we're heading. So this is the Habbie Craig.
It is.
And a great view too of the landscape that
Yes, the
Alan
Pentland.
Ramsay was depicting.
Yes, the Pentland Hills rolling away in the background, and then Habbie's Howe nestling in amongst the trees.
Do you think the characters in The Gentle Shepherd are somehow shaped and formed by the gentle landscape?
Definitely, yes. There's a great gentleness in the play. They sing about the flora and the fauna and about being at one with nature. But of course, the title doesn't really depict a meek shepherd. What it really means and refers to is social class, because he turns out to be a shepherd of a man of gentility.
Oh, I see. So he's really a gentleman shepherd.
Indeed. Yes, he doesn't know that early on, but it's revealed.
Well, I can see why he was inspired. It is lovely.
It is gentle.
The Gentle Shepherd was a roaring success, and fans flocked to see the hills, glens, and the river that had inspired Ramsay's poetic verse. As the North Esk leaves behind the gently rolling hills, it cuts through the extensive land of the now ruined Pennycook House. The grounds surrounding the North Esk were landscaped in the early 1700s to enhance the natural beauty of the estate with formal walks, monuments and lochs. As well as being picturesque, the lochs have been a source of entertainment, especially in winter, providing a stage for Scotland's second national sport, curling. On the banks of the low pond, I meet up with Jim Ramsay.
This is our pond.
It's a fine sight. Now, Jim, we're standing at the shores of the loch, or the pond as you call it, which has played a very significant role in the history of curling.
The first grand match was played here at Pennycook in 1847, which brought teams from all over Scotland together.
What's the nature of the grand match? Who's playing against whom?
Grand match is north of Scotland against south of Scotland. The north being defined as a line from the Forth to the Clyde.
Right.
So anything above that is the north, anything below is the south. And that's the competition.
So the invite went out. How many people responded?
There was 80 rinks appeared, and there's 4 people in a rink.
Right.
Plus spectators, of course.
The excitement and thrill of the event was captured in glorious watercolour by the celebrated painter Jemima Wedderburn. Got some quite well respectable looking people with top hats. And
Indeed.
The rest of it there.
That's right, that's how it would be. The laird or the well-to-do person with the top hat would be the skip, and the farm labourers or whoever would be the other 3 members of the rink.
Doing as they were told.
And they would be doing as they were told, and they would be blamed for losing the game.
Of course they would. That's only natural. I take it you're a skip.
Now and again I'm a skip.
After that first event beside the North Esk, many grand matches were held across Scotland. This curling match was filmed on the Lake of Menteith in 2011. Sadly, due to global warming, outdoor matches are becoming increasingly unlikely. But despite the rarity, Jim maintains that there's nothing like playing outside.
It's the fantastic feeling that you get when you are on a pond or loch like this and you hear the stones rumbling over the ice.
That's why it's called the roaring game, is it?
The roar of the stones going over the water is incredible. You hear it right round the whole valley, and it just makes you feel as though you're doing something right.
Speculating on how long we'll have to wait until the next grand match, I make my way to the neighbouring town of Penicuik. Just 15 kilometres from Edinburgh, and with a plentiful supply of clean, fresh water from the River North Esk, Penicuik was a perfect location for one particularly thirsty industry: papermaking. The first paper mill on the Esk started production in 1709, and Penicuik soon became a centre for papermaking, with 5 mills in the town and outlets all over the world. To learn more about the papermaking process, I'm meeting up with Roger Hipkin at Penicuik's Papermaking Museum.
What's the basic ingredients of paper?
Right.
I'm going back to
Yes.
Victorian
Okay.
times in the
No.
19th century.
Paper making got to Europe in the 1100s or 1000s. And from that time on until 1830, paper was made from linen rags.
From cloth?
Yes.
As demand increased with newspaper production, there weren't enough rags to go round, and a new method needed to be found. In search of a solution, the industry turned to nature.
People were aware that wasps chewed trees and fence posts and so on and created paper nests.
Right.
And trying to industrialise that process set people to work.
Factories soon adopted this method using wood pulp. Rogers offered to demonstrate the basic principles of paper making that are behind the industrial process. First, we dip a decal, as the frame is called, into a solution of wood pulp.
This is what I do. I dunk it in here.
Yes.
To get my thin film of pulp off the gauze, I then need to flip and roll the frame onto a cloth.
Very carefully. This is where it's all going to go horribly wrong, isn't it?
Then you roll it.
I roll it.
It's a tricky motion that isn't a rip-roaring success.
Oh, rubbish. I've torn it.
Yes, okay.
So I'm going to try again.
But before long, I'm on a roll.
Roll it and lift it off in one. That's it. There we are.
Yes! Yes, look. The makings of my very first sheet of paper. Look.
Next, we need to remove the excess water from the wet sheets using a press.
How to make an impression.
Roger looks less than impressed, but once my sheet has been left to dry and carefully peeled off the cloth, I'm quite pleased with the result.
I'm on my way to making a decent piece of paper, and it will become page 1 of chapter 1 of my first novel.
Hoping my handmade paper will inspire me to great things, I head back to the North Esk. Just over 20 kilometres from its source, the river enters the beautiful and romantic Roslin Glen, where it cuts a deep and dramatic gorge through red sandstone. It's hard to believe that industry once dominated the river here.
But if you know where to look, there is evidence of that past industrial age in the tangled vegetation where nature has taken over.
On the banks of the river are crumbling walls, ruined gables and empty tunnels. This is all that's left of Scotland's once biggest gunpowder mill.
Now this is where the power of the river was harnessed to grind down sulphur, charcoal and other ingredients into an explosive powder for use in the mining industry and of course in 2 world wars.
For 150 years, this stretch of the river was a busy, noisy and dangerous place with 7 working mills at its peak. All this industry took its toll on the picturesque North Esk, and by the mid-19th century, the river was in a sorry state.
Black's picturesque tourist guide to Scotland dared to speak the truth when it wrote, "The Esk cannot be described as a clean river. The paper mills at Penicuik and other places higher up defile the waters before it ever runs through the glen. Indeed, all of this beautiful neighbourhood is defiled by mills and pits and other utilitarian works of man." Today, industry has left and thankfully nature is being restored.
Roslin Glen exudes a calm, beautiful and peaceful atmosphere once more. Qualities that attracted some of our greatest artists and writers in the late 18th century. before industry dominated the river. Robert Burns, Lord Byron, Turner and Sir Walter Scott all came here, where they found a landscape that captured the essence of Scottish romanticism. To learn more about this legacy, I'm joining Ainsley McIntosh beside the river.
Ainsley, who first put this fantastic glen on the literary map?
Well, that was Walter Scott. He rented a summer home here from the summer of 1798 through to 1803. And when he first arrived here, he was just another Edinburgh lawyer. He wasn't the writer that we know him for today. But by the time he left his home here, he was Walter Scott, the famous poet.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think this river and this glen helped to inspire him and put him on a literary route to success?
Absolutely. You know, we most readily credit the beginning of Scott's creativity with the landscape around the border region. But he wrote one particular poem called The Grey Brother, and it speaks directly to the influence of the landscape and the history around this region in this poem.
Could you read a bit for me?
Absolutely. Sweet are the paths, O passing sweet, by Esk's fair streams that run, or airy steep through copsewood deep, impervious to the sun. Who knows not Melville's beachy groves and Roslyn's rocky glen, Dalkeith, which all the virtues love, and classic Hawthorne Down.
It's great.
Yeah.
But he was also able to share his passion for this place with some of his literary chums.
That's right. Dorothy and William Wordsworth visited here in 1803. They visited Scott at his cottage, and then they took a walk along this very river.
I understand that Scott, at the time, despite his obvious love for the landscape and for nature, he was something of a modernist. He was embracing industry.
Absolutely. He was excited about the advent of the railways. He had gas in his home at Abbotsford, but he was also a landowner, and he was hugely interested in issues such as deforestation, reforestation, soil degradation. So he's looking at it with this kind of, again, this double vision.
So he'd have a lot to say to where we are in the 21st century, because we're fully aware of the impact that our activities and industry in particular is having on the environment.
Absolutely. And I think had Walter Scott been around, he would inevitably have had a lot to say about that and to write about that.
But he would have done, yeah.
Sir Walter Scott's poetic descriptions drew crowds of tourists to Roslin Glen and brought fame to the neighbouring Rosslyn Chapel. It was built in the 15th century by the Sinclair family, who, it said, had connections with the Knights Templar and the Masonic Lodge. This fueled speculation about the chapel's true meaning and purpose, with myth and legends proliferating.
So this is it, Rosslyn Chapel, the centre of myth.
Among the many tales and conspiracy theories connected to the chapel is the claim that the Holy Grail is buried here. On the wilder, loony fringes of credibility, some people believe that Elvis is buried at Roslin and that a UFO lies beneath the crypt. Looking at the intricate carvings, it's no wonder that they fired the imagination of so many. Angels and demons, lions and leaves, roses and rope. It's an allegory in stone. Or is it?
I have an old guidebook here written by a distant family member, the Reverend John Thompson, who was minister here in Victorian times. Now, he wrote this book as a guide to the symbolism of the chapel.
To help me to decode some of the carvings mentioned in the first official guidebook is Neil Hamilton.
Now, Neil, I've been told that this figure here in the corner represents Satan or Lucifer because of the horns on his head. But according to John Thompson, that's not true.
Well, first of all, I don't think this is the devil. This, in fact, is a carving of Moses.
Of Moses? Why the horns?
A horned Moses that seems to come from a mistranslation made by St. Jerome, where Hebrew words were confused. The words are almost identical, but they sound different, one meaning horned, and the other meaning rays of light or knowledge emanating from Moses' head.
So the idea that it might be Satan is a complete misunderstanding and misinterpretation.
Simply because of the horns.
But there are pagan images, because I can see here, here, and up here too, images of what I understand to be the Green Man. What's that doing in here?
My understanding is that this figure shows an association with us and the natural world. I think the reason that they might have continued or persisted into Christian iconography is an idea that they connected us into the eternal rhythm of the seasons, a symbol of eternal life.
Like Christ?
And
Is Christ the Green Man?
Well, it could be seen that way because of this idea of resurrection, springtime.
But not all the carvings have such joyful interpretations. My guidebook shows an intricately carved column called the Apprentice Pillar, which, it says, has a rather brutal story.
A master mason is said to have been presented with a model that the founder, William St. Clair, wanted to replicate here. But the master mason wasn't sure about how to actually carve out from the model. And so he went off to seek instruction or inspiration. Meanwhile, a young apprentice is said to have dreamt of how to work out the complicated design here and is given permission to go ahead and do the work. And he carved out, created this quite wonderful masterpiece.
It really is extraordinary.
And then the master mason one day returned from his travels and in a jealous rage takes his hammer, his mason's maul, and strikes the boy in the forehead, cracks the boy's skull, kills him.
But it's quite a familiar trope, this story, is it not?
There are several stories of murdered apprentices in medieval churches and cathedrals, and it's perhaps a cautionary tale.
I'm pleased to have been able to decode some of the mysterious carvings in the chapel, but Roslin is still a wild and fabulous expression of the stonemason's craft. Leaving Neil to continue deciphering Roslin, I return to the river North Esk. As it flows past Dalkeith, it passes under the wide span of Montague Bridge, designed by Robert Adam to be looked at from the magnificent Dalkeith Palace. Now 9 kilometres from the sea, the North Esk continues its course northeast to the last town on the river, Musselburgh. There's been a settlement here at the mouth of the river for nearly 2,000 years. To learn more about the fascinating history of Musselburgh, I'm joining Caroline and Jan from Catching the Past, who together run guided historical tours. I'm delighted that they've come suitably attired in period costume.
Now, Caroline, can you tell me how Musselburgh, the town, got its name?
Musselburgh, this town, gets its name from the mussel beds that were fished out in the sea here, out in the Forth.
Right, so the name really comes from the shellfish that you used to find here.
Yes.
Of course, before that it was Eskmouth.
Eskmouth, was it?
Eskmouth, before it was Musselburgh.
To the mouth of the river
Mouth of the Esk.
Now, is it true that Musselburgh was a borough before Edinburgh?
Well, yes. And people of Musselburgh are very proud of that fact. In 1632, it was actually pronounced a royal borough, along with Edinburgh. But the burghers of Edinburgh actually didn't like that. I think it was maybe too much competition. And it was actually rescinded in that same year.
Right. That must have been very annoying.
And we're kind of not over it yet. So we sing Musselburgh was a borough when Edinburgh was nin, and Musselburgh will be a borough when Edinburgh's gain. And that is sung regularly.
That's a very proud song.
Absolutely.
And we're going to go now to the harbour.
Yes.
To see what history there is to be told there.
Yes, certainly.
Today, the harbour is a haven for pleasure boats, but in the 19th century, it thronged with fishing boats.
There were maybe 30 here, 30, maybe 40 abreast. People could walk across the boats. They didn't bother going round the harbour walls because it was there were so many boats in.
Amongst the hustle and bustle of the harbour were the fishwives, who came carrying large baskets on their backs called creels.
When a boat came in, they had to come down to the harbour and they would choose their fish and they would put them on the back of their creels and they would walk up to Edinburgh.
Hard labour, that.
They would do it in a relay system, though. There would be 3 of them and they would take it turns. So they had to have to be very strong women, and they were independent because they had to bring up their families, they had to look after the house, hold the purse strings because they were the ones at home if the husband was out at sea on the boat. They had good heads on their shoulders as well as good shoulder to carry their fish. Broad shoulders to carry their fish.
Thankful that I'm not making the 8-kilometre trek to the capital, I bid farewell to Caroline and Jan and their fishy tales and make my way down to the beach strewn with mussel shells.
In the 19th century, Musselburgh was the place for Edinburgh folk to come for sun, sea and relaxation. And in its heyday, the beach would have been crowded with holidaymakers, all of which makes me think of ice cream. Now what's this I can see before me?
Parked up beside the harbour wall is a very cool-looking vintage van. Standing by with the scoop is Yolanda Luca from Musselburgh's famous Luca's ice cream.
Now Yolanda, I understand that your family have got an Italian background.
Yes, my grandfather came over from Italy in 1908 and got a job at the North British Hotel on Princes Street. And he met a Swiss sous chef and he taught him how to make ice cream. So that was where it all started.
So really it's a kind of Swiss ice cream, or Swiss-Italian ice cream?
Yes, and obviously with a Scottish flair, yes.
And then he set up in business by himself and he moved here to Musselburgh?
They lived in the centre of Edinburgh and apparently walked every day, got premises in Musselburgh, and we're still in the same premises since 1908.
That's amazing, over 100 years of making ice cream. Is there a secret recipe?
There is indeed, yes. I mean, it's obviously not so secret these days because everything's on the labels, but yeah, it's the way we make it, with love.
With love? Is that the secret ingredient?
Yes.
No, is there a particular flavour that he favoured above all?
Vanilla. It was always vanilla.
Well, I would love to try one of these ice creams. The signature Lucas vanilla, please.
Yes, certainly. There we go.
That's fantastic.
Bye-bye.
There's nothing quite like a 99 at the seaside.
Delicious.
Finishing my ice cream, I make tracks across the shells and sand to the mouth of the River North Esk.
So this is Journey's End, the final destination of my grand tour down the River North Esk, which has been weaving a route through the picturesque, the sublime and half-forgotten industries. And now I'm on the beach at Musselburgh, where the River North Esk finally meets the sea.
On my next grand tour, I'll be in the Scottish borders, ghost hunting and riding the marches as I follow the River Teviot.